Hey. I only read 38 books this year, and I say only because I did expect myself to read almost double that, because that is technically my average reading speed. However, I had perhaps the busiest year of my entire life, and I experienced burnout multiple times, and I had the worst reading slumps that would span over months. But I'd still love to give you a 2024 reading wrap up. So we're going to start in chronological order, just basically from 1st of January until the day that I'm filming this right now. So let's go. I started the year with White Nights by Dostoevsky, and I have a lot of things to say about this book, namely that I have a big issue with the way in which this book is being marketed, mainly by, online book talkers, book Twitter, bookstagram, booktube, etc., but also by Goodreads, bookstores. Anywhere I looked to try and get some form of an idea of what it was and whether or not I wanted to read it, this book was advertised to me and sold to me as somewhat of a love story, something that would redefine love for me, that would really make me understand what loving and yearning and pining was. And I was incredibly disappointed by that. That's not to say that White Nights by Dostoevsky isn't good. It's just to say that if you market it in a certain way, you are going to disappoint a lot of readers. Now, if you had told me that this was a book about existentialism, if this was a book about a loss of identity, about loneliness, about what it means to live in your head, to dissociate, to be a dreamer in a world where dreaming isn't acceptable, and I had picked up that book, I would have loved every single second of it. If anything, I would have been far more excited to read it, because that is what stood out to me the most in this story. That is what I loved the most about this story. Every single thing I underlined, everything I enjoyed about it was that, his loneliness, his mental capacity, his mental state, everything about it was just chef's kiss. But the romance itself I had an issue with, and I don't really understand why people loved the romance so much, because it's a 17-year-old girl and a 27-year-old man, really weird age gap. He meets her when she's, crying on a bridge or crying on her own alone in the city. She's vulnerable, she's heartbroken, and he decides in that moment to latch onto this girl and form this weird type of friendship where he's falling madly in love with her. They only spend a few days together. He's borderline, in my opinion, just stalking her. It's just infatuation, it's obsession, it's limerence. And then sort of obviously it is his perspective, but in his perspective sort of villainizes her for going back to the man that she'd been in love with for about a year, who she was crying over when they met. And the love didn't stand out to me. I was incredibly disappointed with the love story, and if this was just advertised as a story of existentialism and a declining, depleting mental health, I would have said, actually, yeah, lives just up to it. I then read a poetry collection called Untethered by Joy Ismail. This is a Lebanese poetry book by a Lebanese author that my friend bought for me for my birthday from a bookstore in Lebanon. And I was really, really excited to read this, because very rarely do I see books and authors from Lebanon that aren't non-fiction. Most authors and most books that come out of Lebanon are non-fiction books. They are normally about the civil war or about the regular war, about conflict, etc. And I was really excited to read poetry or to read fiction by it. But the poetry itself to me was a bit, and I know poetry is subjective, so I'm not saying it's objectively bad, it just wasn't for me. I read the whole anthology in about 10 minutes and I was just a bit disappointed. It felt to me like the type of poems that you write experimentally in your diary and in your journal. I then read Girl in Pieces by Kathleen Glasgow, and I went into a full rant about this in my top 5 worst books of 2024. I hated every second of this book. It to me felt like a manual on how to hurt yourself rather than a book on the hope that comes with healing and recovery. To me, at certain points, felt a little bit triggering. Even though there were trigger warnings, I just didn't expect it to be like that. It was a very detailed description of exactly how you need to do it, what materials you needed, and then again the love and the age gap. It was a 10-year age gap, and he had her slinging drugs for him, and he was manipulating her, and he was taking advantage of this poor mentally unstable girl. I didn't enjoy it, and the writing just felt a bit bland. It felt a bit stiff. I didn't relate to any of the characters. I didn't feel any type of connection to the characters. It's not so much that I need to relate to characters, but I need to connect with characters, and I didn't feel that. Our Wives Under the Sea by Julie Armfield. I really, really, really enjoyed this book. I think I gave it 3.54 stars, but that's just because I enjoyed the experimentalist nature of it. I enjoyed the idea of it, but the reading itself for me felt sometimes like a bit of a chore. But it's really cool. It's about this girl who's married to, this was so long ago, a woman who goes down in a submarine for research projects, and something happens when she's down in the submarine and she comes back completely changed, and you know, eventually her skin starts to bubble and peel off, and it's really weird, and you never really get any answers whatsoever. But I love genres like that. I love experimental fiction like that. I love experimental lit fic. It was really enjoyable. The flashbacks and the non-linear narrative and the way they spoke about their love before all of this happened was absolutely stunning, and I enjoyed it so much. It just to me wasn't a 5-star read. I read A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. One thing about me, I adore Hafsa Faisal. I love We Hunt the Flame and We Free the Stars. A Tempest of Tea to me was not as good as that. You know, I still enjoyed the story. I still really liked it. I am looking forward to the sequel because I feel like the story will get infinitely better with the sequel. But having read We Hunt the Flame and We Free the Stars first, it felt like her writing got a little bit lazier. It felt like the plot wasn't as exciting, as immersive, wasn't as enjoyable and just sort of deep and high stakes as We Hunt the Flames were, and that wasn't her intention, fair, but it wasn't for me. It felt like We Hunt the Flame was still within the YA category, but it was for the more mature YA, and A Tempest of Tea was for the less mature YA. It was for the younger readers, so I think I just wasn't the target audience for this book. Getting really dark. I've turned the brightness up. I hope that works. I then in a row read Get in My Swamp by GM Fairy, November 9th by Colleen Hoover, and Unhinged by Vera Valentine. I spoke about every single one of these books in my top 5 worst books of 2024 because I hated every second of them, but at the same time, Get in My Swamp and Unhinged were thoroughly entertaining. Very, very hilarious. Get in My Swamp is basically a Shrek fanfiction. Unhinged is a door fanfiction. Exactly what that sounds like. A woman who sleeps with her door with like some Greek mythology thrown in. November 9th is just a Colleen Hoover book. So I rated all of these books 1 star. If I could give November 9th a 0 star, I would, but unfortunately I'm incapable of doing that, so it's a 1 star. Unhinged and Get in My Swamp would stick at 1 star because it was really, really funny, but just objectively not very good books, so they're in the worst books that I read in 2024. I read An Unnecessary Woman by Rabih Alamuddin. Beautiful book. I read this for my book club and I actually filmed a whole like reading vlog, baking vlog about this. I really, really enjoyed this book. This is, again, a Lebanese story that is fiction but one still rooted in the civil war in Lebanon. It was written by a man, and I specify this because very rarely do I read books written by men that truly encapsulate just sort of, you know, a woman's perspective, because the main character is a woman, and I feel like Rabih wrote her perfectly. I feel like he wrote her in such a way that I felt like a woman had written this. The story was enjoyable. The character herself is funny. She's an old lady and she's just angry at everyone, and she's funny, she's entertaining. I really enjoyed that book so much. It's set in the setting of the Lebanese Civil War. And it just goes back and forth between the life that she lived, how she grew up, how she perceived the husband she was forced to marry, and then the divorce she had to experience, and how she was perceived as an outcast within her community, within her neighborhood. You know, she dyed her hair in the first page of a book a bright blue, which is not something you would expect from a really elder lady, especially not an elderly lady in Lebanon. It was just thoroughly enjoyable book. I read Foureids and a Funeral, which is a young adult rom-com. I really enjoyed this, especially because very rarely do you get any young adult romance or romance books in general with 2 Muslim characters, and I thought it was perfect. I'm not the target audience just because it's a young adult romance, and I can read young adult fantasy because it's still, I feel like young adult fantasy is still inherently far more mature than young adult romance is, and that's absolutely fine. I am not a 16-year-old girl. I don't need to be reading young adult romances. I can read adult romances or new adult romances. So the book itself, I said girl, boys can read romance too, but the book itself, incredibly beautiful. I really loved the story. The writing was impeccable. I feel like if I was a 17-year-old, I would have 100% rated it a 5 star, and the only reason it wasn't a 5 star is because I'm not 17 years old, so I still give it a 5 star just because I'm putting into context that I'm not a teenager. But it's about these 2 kids who, you know, are really dedicated, really loyal to their Islamic center, and then one day it gets burnt down, and the community that they're in, essentially, you know, the government and the mayor do not want to fund the rebuilding of this Islamic center, so they take it upon themselves to fundraise and to rebuild the Islamic center themselves by getting the word out, getting advertisement, etc. And it's a truly, you know, sweet and wholesome story, and their love is just, you know, it's best friends to lovers with a bit of conflict in between. I really enjoyed the story. I think it's unbelievably sweet. I read Happy Place by Emily Henry. Really enjoyed it, but I read another book by Emily Henry this year which way outweighed it. But Happy Place is about a girl and a boy, and they were engaged, and they blew off the engagement. They basically just decided, we don't want to be together, we don't love each other anymore, but they haven't told any of their friends, and their friends are throwing, you know, a bridal shower, like a type of party abroad before they sell the house that they've been holidaying in every single year, and before the wedding, etc., until you find out that the friends actually knew that the engagement was off and they were trying to pair them back together. I really liked it. It's kind of second chance romance. One thing about Emily Henry, she's going to make me invest myself into a romance story. I don't think it's the best of her works, but it was still thoroughly enjoyable, and I'd still give it 4 stars. I read In the Country of Men by Hisham Matar, and I would really love to go into depth about this, but unfortunately I don't actually remember too much about this book, so I would just ask you to go into other reviews about this book, because I don't want to falsely discuss the book and falsely give an opinion. I can't remember it. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. Loved every second about this book. Spoke about it in my top 5 of 25, my favorite books of the year. If you want to watch that video, you can, but if you want a really quick run through, it's basically about these women who are living in a cage. They're living underground. They don't know why. They've been there for short of 2 decades, until one day blaring alarms sound just as their guards are about to open their gate to feed them, and they leave the keys in the gate when they run away. So they open these gates and they try and explore the world that they live in, until they find that they are basically some of the only people left alive, and they are never going to get answers. And they create this community of women. They create this community of people and family, and they rediscover what it means to live outside of a cage. And I think it's a fantastic exploration of humanity and womanhood and girlhood and femininity and community. And I really, really enjoyed that the ending still doesn't really give you any answers. I had so much fun reading this book, and I recommend it to as many people as I possibly can. I read Letters from Medea. I read this because I kept seeing quotes of it on those poetry slideshows that you come across on TikTok, and I will say the poetry slideshows are a lot more enjoyable than the actual piece of work, but hey, who am I to judge? I'm a book reviewer, so I am the one to judge. It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne DeMarkin. I loved every single second of this book. I actually read this book because I kept on seeing Leia recommend this book and talk about how much she enjoyed it, and I trust Leia's recommendations with my life. When it comes to lit fic, like, she's the person to go to. She's the person that really gives me a lot of my lit fic recommendations, and I read this on my solo trip to Verona, and I was having so much fun with it. It's a really interesting read. It's experimental. It's about a girl who comes back to life. She's sort of, you know, hovering in the threshold of real life and afterlife, and she's in a zombie form, and she's trying to remember who she is. She has no recollection of who she is, and she's talking to the reader as though she knows us. And it's just, that's the best way that I can explain it. It's about 100 pages, and I feel like if I talk any more about it, it is just spoilers, and I do really want at least one person watching this video to read it, so please read it. I read The Tempest by Shakespeare. It's Shakespeare. I don't know what else I can tell you. I love Shakespeare. I love The Tempest. Fun. Then I read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. You know me, you know I love James Baldwin, you know I'm going to talk about James Baldwin any opportunity I get. Giovanni's Room was my second ever encounter with fiction by James Baldwin. I mainly am a fan of Baldwin because of his non-fiction works and his essays and his speeches and his interviews, etc. But really, really enjoyed Giovanni's Room. Absolutely devastating. It's about 2 men in Paris when, you know, homophobia was still acceptable. Absolutely devastating book, but also just such beautiful writing, such incredible technique. Just Baldwin, man. Baldwin does not fail me. I don't know what else to say. Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harlow. It's a 30-page Kindle short story that, to me, reawoke in me my love for fantasy. I'd been in a year-long reading slump, and I just could not get back into fantasy. It was all just too much for me, and this reawoke it in me. In just 30 pages, it explored some things that 400 fantasy books sometimes do not manage to get in a book. I was so connected to the main character. I was so connected to her friend. I was connected to her story, to her journey, to her progression and her arc, you know, into this sort of obsession with being the best and this sort of collapse within your story. And there is no way for me to truly explain the story to you without telling you to read it, because it's 30 pages. I feel like I've already told you the first 15 pages of the story, but absolutely incredible. And it's free if you have Amazon Prime, if you have Kindle Unlimited, and if not, mate, you can find it on any of the EPUB sites. And if you can't, text me, I'll send you a link. I read A Surrender Theory by Caitlin Conlon. I picked this up, number 1, because Conlon was the surname of one of my favorite teachers when I was a child, and number 2, because it was a poetry anthology, and I felt like it had been a while since I'd read poetry. The first half of this book did more for me than the second half of it did. The first few poems about grief, about her relationship with her grandmother, were absolutely stunning. Really, really hit home, just a stab in the chest. The second half just felt a bit wishy-washy in my opinion, but I still enjoyed it, and I think I gave it around 3 stars. Then I got really into short stories, online short stories, and I read for, what was her name? For Esme with Love and Squalor by J.D. Salinger. I actually don't know how to pronounce his name. This was recommended to me by a man and I met in a bookstore on my birthday when I go around and I ask strangers for a piece of advice, and I was talking to him, blah, 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 and we got to talking and he told me this is one of his favourite short stories ever. I liked it. I didn't love it. I think I'd give it a 3.5, 4 stars. Then I read What the Dead Know by Nevo, which is a short horror story / psychological thriller about 2 mediums who pretend to be mediums. And, you know, they sort of work off of the fact that they're ethnically ambiguous. And, you know, white people love this idea of, you know, the witches and etc., etc. And they pretend to commune with the dead until one day she actually does commune with the dead. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's a 30-page short story and I was actually scared. I was reading the page like, oh, what the fuck? But I really, really enjoyed it. And that got me into Persephone by Lev Grossman. Didn't like that one as much. Felt like it was written for children. Felt like kind of, a rip-off Percy Jackson / a rip-off Harry Potter, I guess. But that's kind of what stopped my short story vibe, and I moved back to books. And that's when I read You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hoggle. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. This was my first rom-com since Happy Place, and before that, a year prior. And I loved every single second of this book. It's about these 2 characters and they are engaged, but they've low-key fallen out of love with each other, but that neither one of them wants to call off the engagement because whoever it is that calls off the engagement has to pay for everything that's already been put into the wedding, and they don't want to do that. So they essentially come up with these own individual plans to continuously prank each other to make the other person hate them enough to call off the engagement. So it's just this book, this collection of them just playing pranks on each other and making them hate each other. And without realizing, slowly falling back in love with each other. And it's such a beautiful read. It's such an enjoyable read. I started the book thinking, oh my God, what a mama's boy. I cannot stand this man. And ended the book with, give me a piece of that man's leg right now so I can chew it up. It was so good. I really, 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 really enjoyed that book. It was so funny. Speaking of funny, I read Funny Story by Emily Henry. And if you follow me on TikTok or you follow me on Instagram or you've watched like at least 2 of my videos on my YouTube channel, you'll know I absolutely adore this book. As I say, Emily Henry, one thing she's gonna do is make me get invested into her characters, make me get invested into the story, and she did that. She invested me. And one thing about me, I was giggling, I was screaming, I was kicking my feet reading this book. I read the entire thing in one night, 3 hours before I had to be awake for a 4-hour flight. It was, oh, I had so much fun. I had so much fun. It's, again, you can just go watch my other videos and then skip this bit. I'm going to have them chaptered. But it's fake dating done right. You know, a girl gets dumped by her fiance on the night of his bachelor party because he's in love with his female best friend. And his female best friend's ex-boyfriend gets dumped by her. So main girl has to live with ex-boyfriend. They decide to fake date to piss the exes off. And then they eventually form a fantastic friendship first. And then they fall in love. And I think that's how fake dating is always done right. And I loved every second of it. I read Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, which is 2 short stories, which in my opinion feel experimental but done in such a fantastic way. I loved every second of them. Both of them explore grief in very interesting ways. Both of them explore, you know, how to handle grief, how to handle loneliness, how to handle selfhood in really concise ways, in really beautiful ways, in really creative ways. And I'm genuinely waiting for a year to pass for me to forget the story so that I can read it again, because I enjoyed every single second. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson, which is an intentionally experimental sapphic litfic. That's a mouthful, I know, but the author, there's a foreword from the author saying she was intentionally experimental with this. She was trying new literary techniques, she was trying new writing methods, she was trying to be different from not only her previous works but just literature in general, and I feel like it really succeeded in it. At some points I didn't enjoy the experimental method, but I cannot knock stars off of that because she acknowledges that that's what she's doing. It's not just a writing style that I didn't like, it's her acknowledging she's trying something new, and who am I to knock someone for trying something new? The story itself was thoroughly enjoyable. I love sapphic literature, I love sapphic litfic. And the way that it was done, the way that it was embodied was just, it was soft and it was sweet and it was explorative, and it really discussed things in a way that I just hadn't considered in literature before, because most of the sapphic books I read are either just regular rom-coms or fantasy. So I was really surprised and impressed by this. Run of the Crescent Moon by Saladin Ahmed, which is an adult high fantasy set in a Middle Eastern setting with Middle Eastern characters. It explores jinns, it explores, just imagine the show Supernatural but make it more magical and make it Middle Eastern, you know, it's like that. Really enjoyed it. My favorite thing about the book, I think I would say, is the setting. I felt like reading this book, I felt like I was walking through Jordan, and then I felt like I was walking through Lebanon, and I felt like I was talking to the local villagers and the local fruit sellers and the markets. I felt like I was talking to my grandfather, and that's my favorite thing about the book. Plot-wise, I think it could have done better. I think most of the book was just their journey, and it was the final 50 pages that was, you know, really the plot, which disappointed me a little bit, and I think it would have done better as a young adult book if you just took away some of the swear words. But yeah. If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, which is also in my top favourite books of 2025. I loved every single second of this book. It's about these two characters who are madly in love with one another. The girl is pregnant. The boy has been wrongfully imprisoned for rape because he's a black man in 60s, 70s America. The story is a non-linear narrative, which some people have called confusing and said they couldn't follow. I actually think it was a very easy to follow, because Baldwin made it very clear to us when it was in the past and when it was in the present. And it goes back and forth between the story of the two main characters falling in love with one another and back into the present of the main character doing everything she can within her power to free him, to get him justice, to clear his name. And it's so timely, it's so incredible, it's such a well-written book. As I say over and over again, James Baldwin has never failed me. Scythe by Neil Shusterman. Again, spoke about this in my top 6 favorite books of 2024. Loved this book so much. My first experience with a full-on sci-fi novel. I've read sci-fi before, but never in a full novel. Cannot wait to read the second book. It's actually propping up my camera right now. Really excited for it. Such a fantastic concept, such a fantastic idea. I love dystopia, I love sci-fi. Everything about it was interesting. It's basically a utopia that has conquered death, and you cannot die unless a scythe who has a cape comes around and gleans you, which means kill you. And one scythe decides to take two main characters as his apprentices, who then figure out that only one of them can survive, only one of them can become a scythe, and the other one is going to have to die. But they're also slowly kind of falling for each other. It's just, I enjoyed every second of this book. I read the collected translated works of Sappho. It was a bit disappointing, I'm not gonna lie. I expected a lot more, but, you know, it's all fragments. I don't like it. That's all I can say, to be honest with you. Rosie Project by Graham Simpson. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Feel free to correct me if I'm not. I really like this book. It's very different from the books I would usually read, and it was recommended to me by a colleague of mine who I very often do book swaps with, and he will give me a book that he knows I never would have picked up on my own and vice versa, and he gave me this. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the concept of it. It's about an autistic man who's on the spectrum and who has never had any success dating, and he's looking for a wife, and he decides to create this project, this survey, this, you know, trial and error of finding his dream wife, and eventually gets paired with the complete antithesis of what he wants. It was really enjoyable. It was quite funny at times. I really liked the characters. Something that knocked it down a star or two for me is that there was one joke about Islam in it that I wasn't a fan of, you know? It's a common joke that a lot of people make, but my issue is you are not Muslim, and you're probably not surrounded by any Muslims. I doubt you have any Muslim friends whatsoever in your life. So to me, the joke does not feel like a joke. It feels like you just grabbed an opportunity to, you know, make a snide remark about Muslims and just ran with it. And that bothered me a little bit. I'm not okay with that. I'm a Muslim woman. I've heard this joke numerous times. Just wasn't for me. The Silent Patient. I've said my part about this. If you want to know why there is so much rage in my tone as I say it, just go back to my worst books of 2024. I hated this book. I hated every single thing about this book. It's about a woman who gets arrested for murdering her husband and then goes completely mute, goes completely silent, and then gets locked up in mental asylum. And then a doctor, decides he wants to be the one to get her to speak again and figure out why she killed her husband and why she's gone silent. I hated it. Go to my other video to know why, because I refuse to talk about it any longer than this. Wol of Oraro by Chaos Veloso. This book I picked up because I saw the first line on Instagram or on TikTok, and the opening line to this book is they called me the bitch queen because I killed a man and exiled my king on the first day that I was crowned, something along those lines. Loved it. I really think the book was great. It was 4 stars just because sometimes it was a bit slow for me, sometimes it was meh for me, but it's a young adult high fantasy. It's incredible. I really loved every single second of it. You know, the world building was so intricate. It was done so seamlessly, so effortlessly, woven into the fabric of the text in a way that didn't feel like overdone, didn't feel like info dumping, didn't feel like she was forcing this onto me. The main character is just so, I can't say relatable, I don't relate to her, but she's so likable, she's so agreeable, she's the type of person that, you know, she wants to be something so badly, and unfortunately the world that she's thrust into and the person that she must be, you know, the crown that she must carry is so heavy. And it's just, you love her so much and you just want her to be happy, you just want her to succeed, but life just keeps throwing boomerangs her way. And I really liked it, and the relationships that she forms, you know, the friendships that she forms. I just feel so sorry for her, and I just want to pull her into my arms and hold her, because she's such a strong woman, but she's also such a fragile woman, and she deserves better. Read The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, made me sob my eyes out from here until tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to go into it too much, just because a few people messaged me and commented under a video I posted, people who are from Afghanistan, saying that they get uncomfortable when people discuss and promote Khaled Hosseini because they feel like he was a proxy for the American voice, and they feel like his books were very, you know, American white savior. So I'm going to take that I'm not from Afghanistan. It is not my place to say whether or not, you know, they are right. I don't have enough research on this. I've only read 2 of his books, so I enjoyed the book, but I don't know if I can, in my right mind, talk more about it or recommend it. Boulder by Eva Baltasar. This is a sapphic lit fic. So exciting. Such a good book. It's about 100 pages long. It was recommended to me by a bookseller in Waterstones, who came up to me and she was like, I know you, I know your videos. And that was the first time in my life I've ever been recognized in public. That's never happened to me before. It was a very surreal experience. I was like, oh my God, what the hell? Didn't realize people actually knew who I was. But she came up to me and she was talking to me about the book. I was looking at it because it had a really cool cover, and she was like, no, this book is fantastic. You really need to read it. It's about this woman who's living on a ship, on a merchant ship, and she falls in love with a woman on one of their breaks and decides to, you know, quit that job and move in with this woman until that woman decides she wants a child. And the main character doesn't want a child, but she loves this woman, so she's going to let her, you know, get pregnant, etc., etc. And it just explores what it means to... It explores motherhood when motherhood is thrust upon you and you don't want it. It explores femininity, it explores girlhood, it explores this idea of never truly feeling like you belong in any place and feeling the need to consistently be moving around in order to feel like you belong. I think it was a really beautiful read. I read One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig, which really fun book. I see this book consistently being advertised as romantasy, and while it is a fantasy with romance, I feel like just the label romantasy might push a lot of people away who have a stigma around romantasy around it. You know those people, you know they exist. Because this book is far more, it's so much more than a romance. You know, a romantasy a lot of the time is a romance book. From what I understand, it's a romance book with fantastical elements in it. This is a fantasy book with a romance subplot. I feel like to just call it a romance, to just call it a romantasy, takes away from truly the poignant journey of the main character and her slow disintegration of her mind, the disintegration of who she is as a person, as this virus is taking over her brain, as she's deciding who she wants to be as a person. And then the romance is a fantastic carrier element. It's incredibly weaved throughout the story, but I don't think that that's all that it is. I read The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid. Very short story. I feel like I can't talk more about it than I already did in my top 6 favorite books of 2025, so feel free to watch that video, but it's incredible and it's a fantastic book to read if you've been recently feeling what it feels like to be a diaspora in the West and what it feels like to sort of feel othered but also feel like everyone around you is the other and you're the only one that makes sense. Something like that. Really great book. Finally ended the year with the short story The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins. This book was just, it blew my mind. It's about 30 pages long, maybe, actually no, I think it's 60 pages. Actually, I don't remember, I'm lying to you. It's such a good book. It's about a young woman who's experiencing what we would now call postpartum psychosis, but there wasn't a name for it at the time, and her husband, who was a physician, decided to just lock her up in a room in an old house so that she can get bed rest and go to sleep consistently. And she starts losing her mind a little bit, and she starts seeing a woman in the yellow wallpaper in her room and starts believing that this woman is trying with all her might to break out of the wallpaper, and she's going crazy trying to figure out how she can free this woman. And it's just, I'm speechless. I don't know how else to talk about this again without giving spoilers because it's such a short story, but please read it. If you like stories about women, if you like stories about female rage, if you like stories about women slowly losing their minds, if you like stories that are experimental, just, if you like reading, read the book is basically what I'm gonna say. But that is my 2024 reading wrap up. It was a fantastic year. I cannot wait for 2025. I have so many books I want to read. I have so many things I want to do. I'm planning on truly finalizing my book and hopefully having it published for all of you. Yeah, happy new year. I hope you have a wonderful holiday and see you in the new year. Bye. Hey, I just realized I said see you in the new year. It's the 3rd of January, my bad guys. See you today. Bye.